Welcome back. I'm joined now by today's Piers Back, TalkTV's international editor Isabel Oakeshott, and author Bonnie Greer, and associate editor of The Spectator and author Douglas Murray, who I guess... Are you in New York, Douglas?
I am indeed.
So, look, from your lofty scenario over there in New York, looking back at your mother country here, a lot of things that have been bubbling here, big. And I wouldn't mind just getting your take on that from New York. First of all, I don't know if you heard that interview just now with Mick Lynch about the strikes coming next week, but it does feel like a real throwback, this, to the 70s and 80s. You know, the old, militant union bosses holding the country to ransom. I just can't help feeling it's so ill-timed to be doing this right now.
I couldn't agree more. I listened to the interview with great interest because, like everybody else in Britain, I have had an experience plenty of times in my life of what happens when the rail unions go on strike. And, you know, what it means is that everybody trying to get into their place of work has the most miserable time imaginable. I've done it myself countless numbers of times when the unions strike. You end up having to stand for hours at a bus stop to get onto a massively overcrowded bus and travel for hours to do a journey that would normally take you maybe half an hour. And so every time this happens, public sentiment against the unions grows. I can assure you, and many of your viewers will appreciate this, nobody stands under somebody else's armpit on a massively overcrowded bus for hours and thinks happily about the rail unions. Nobody thinks, yeah, those guys should get a way above inflation pay rise. Nobody thinks that.
Well, that's
nobody
the
thinks that the rail
Bonnie Greer is
bosses
raising her hand, actually.
I stand under people's armpits, and I don't have a problem with that. I think a part of a civilized society...
Well, you're an unusual person.
Well, it's true, and I used to live in New York, too, so I can say that. Part of civilized society is that workers should be able to withhold their labor, and we need organized labor. I have no problems with this at all, even though it is hurting people. I admit that. It is hurting people.
There's no problems with it, really?
No, I really don't.
They want an 11% pay rise.
They probably deserve it.
They don't deserve it.
Why don't they deserve it?
Why would a train driver who may be earning £54,000 or more a year right now in this economic climate deserve an 11% pay rise? Well, nurses can barely get 1%.
Well, I can't go into a technical thing about a train driver. But that's a skilled job.
54 grand.
That's a skilled
and in fact, he admitted they were more.
Well, that's an important job. I don't mind them getting a lot of money.
It's saving lives. It's driving a train.
But he's also...
You get in, you sit there, you press a button,
but he's not driving an empty... No, he's not just pressing a button.
Pretty much.
And he's not
Actually, pretty much is what they do.
I don't know anything about driving a train. All I'm saying is...
you never deserve an 11% pay rise.
I'm going to give them the 11% pay rise because they're workers, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, that's ridiculous, attitude.
It's not a ridiculous.
All right, then any worker can ask for anything. And you, Bonnie Greer, just go, yeah, you can have it. Isabel.
I would, actually.
Isabel. Douglas, you want to come back on that?
I would, actually.
I just wanted to point out, Bonnie said that it's a skilled job. She then said it's an important job. It is an important job. It's not a skilled job, and there's one way to tell that, Bonnie. You or I could become a train driver if we trained. But you or I could not just become a brain surgeon tomorrow, could we?
Right. What's that got to do with being a train driver?
Well, the point being, it's not that skilled a work.
Oh, no, we're going to compare brain surgeon to a train driver. That's not equal, is it?
But what I would compare is brain surgeons to this, and anyone working in the health service.
But you can't put a brain surgeon to a driver.
It's so unskilled that, guess what, we can actually get driverless trains, and that is what we should be looking to do. This is a long-term investment. There's no quick fix here, but these guys are basically talking themselves out of a job. Their pay packages are pretty generous. I've looked at the fine print. There have been various good newspaper exposés of that in recent days. I mean, many people in this country would absolutely love those jobs. And frankly, if I were in charge, I would sack a lot of them.
That's not how you measure anything. These people are driving trains. I have no problem with giving people who are driving trains what they want. No problem.
That's a ridiculous attitude, Bonnie. You can't just say you can have whatever you want.
Look, I am interested in safety. I'm interested in if workers need to have a pay rise in this climate. I don't know when they last had one, Piers. I don't know when they last had one.
I don't think the priority right now. I've nothing against train drivers, by the way. I don't get the train that often. When I do, it's an okay experience. It used to be much more enjoyable driving on the train. It's not enjoyable anymore. They run late. They have poor records now on
They're all
service.
privately owned, aren't they?
Well, I just think it's
already
not an experience it
charge
used to
through
be.
the
It's
nose.
not that enjoyable.
Well,
Packing people in sardines on smaller carriages.
It's not their problem. It's not their fault.
Bonnie, your argument just seems to be because they want a pay rise, they should get a pay rise.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to apply that to every single worker in this country? And if so,
And they can have whatever
how
they
on
want,
earth is
can
it
they?
going to be paid for?
You can all have whatever
I
you
don't get
want.
it.
Let's
Who's
bankrupt the country.
going to pay for the pay rises? Is it going to be millions of passengers?
So what are you saying exactly? That we
I'm
should...
saying that your argument is utterly absurd, that they should have a pay rise because they want it, and you think that they're
And they
clever.
should have whatever they want.
I think that the basic premise of this is I'm for workers. I guess that's
Of
what
course,
I'm saying.
we're all
Wait a
for
minute, hang on.
workers. I'm for workers.
I guess that's what I'm saying. Now, we want to sit around and talk about should they get 12%, should they get 13%? I don't know.
I'm for workers, but Bonnie,
if
I'm not...
if a worker goes out,
I get
that's
it.
all that they have.
Look, I'm
is
for
withhold
workers,
their
but I'm
labor.
not for a bankrupt country, which is where your philosophy, I'm afraid, would take us. Douglas, I want to bring you back
That's
to
just them take
the other
back what they-
raging story of the week is, of course, Rwanda. I'm interested in your take, Douglas, on what you think about it. It seems to me this is a completely doomed policy, that whether you agree with the principle behind it, it's just not going to happen.
Well, that's possible that it won't happen. I support the policy. I support us having borders. I support stopping and dissuading people from engaging in illegal migration into the country. And nobody who's criticised the Rwanda policy has yet come up with a better policy of what to do to stop the illegal migration at the south coast. But you're right, Piers, it may well not happen. Of course, the first plane didn't end up taking off this week. And why? Because of the ECHR. And I think, by the way, I wrote this last week in The Sun. I said that, and I've said many times in the last few years, there was always going to come a day when the British people realised that we had left the customs union and other aspects of the EU, but we remained under the jurisdiction of European law. Now, the ECHR and the European Court that enforces it was the mechanism by which various people made sure that the plane couldn't leave to Rwanda this week. The British courts approved it, but the various activist lawyers and trade unions and others went to use the ECHR, and that was why the flight was blocked. So here's the thing, I think, Pierre. This is a massive political car crash that's been waiting to happen for a long time. The government did not bother to address the issue of the ECHR in recent years, and now the British public are getting to see something that should have been completely predictable, which was that we have remained and do remain still under the jurisdiction of elements of European law.
Yeah.
And that is not why we left the EU. We did not land, of course, at this point all the smartasses say, oh, well, the ECHR is different from the EU. That's true. But nevertheless, the idea of Brexit was we get back control of our borders, of our sovereignty and the right to make our own laws.
You know, my problem with
as was
Brexit...
shown this week, we don't have that.
Douglas, my problem with Brexit, and I voted Remain, but then I also voted for Boris Johnson at the election because he was the only leader prepared to deliver the result of the referendum. And I believe that democracy and honouring democratic votes was more important than my personal feelings. I've got to say, though, I tweeted this yesterday to a huge response. At some stage, we are going to have to start seeing some benefits from Brexit.
Yeah, sure.
And if we don't, you know, the jungle drums beating to try and maybe overturn it with future governments, they're going to get louder. Because right now, it's very hard to point to anything and say, well, look, Brexit's working.
Well, I think that's true. I think that, I mean, I don't agree that nothing is good from the last few years. It's been a very unusual time. And of course, don't forget the moment we left the EU, we immediately went into a global pandemic and turned down. So it's extremely hard actually to work that stuff out. I do maintain, though, that the main reason the British public voted for Brexit was that we were told, I think with honesty and accurately, that we could make sure that we could become a sovereign country again, in charge of our own borders, in charge of our own laws.
OK, Bonnie, come in on
America
Let's not
is, like other countries
Let's not
are.
leave the impression that this was an overwhelming vote for Brexit. This was pretty much... This was very narrow.
Well, it was actually... hang on. It was over 17.5 million people.
Exactly, but it was...
One of the biggest votes in the history of our country.
Right, but it was a narrow result. And the fact that something like this was decided on a simple yes. One person could have decided Brexit on a simple majority is absurd.
And people like me... Revisiting this.
I don't think you can revisit it.
I do think, though,
that the call down the line for another referendum will get louder if there are no benefits to be seen from Brexit.
Actually, I'm going to surprise you by agreeing with you on that, and I'm probably going to annoy a bunch of Brexiteers. I mean, now we've got to make Brexit work.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be an opportunity.
And by the way, I want it to work.
Not a problem.
Now that we've pressed this button as a country,
So-
I respect people's opinions.
Brexit
We've got to make it work.
Brexit was absurd.
Bonnie, rather than ranting about
no, I'm not
Brexit,
ranting.
you
I'm
are
not ranting.
ranting.
No, I'm not.
You can't undo the referendum.
You have
Bonnie.
not
I'm
let
not.
me.
No,
you have
I'm
not
not
let me
undoing the
respond.
referendum.
Let Isabel
And
finish.
so if you call me a ranter, how can I let you respond?
All right.
The point
Well-
I would like to make is you're absolutely right. The whole country needs to see, everybody, including those that didn't vote for Brexit,
Tangible
because in the
benefit.
end, we're all in this together,
Well, why haven't we
needs
seen
to
it, do
see
you think,
tangible
Isabel? What do you
benefits,
think we haven't
and
seen?
among those is going to have to be leaving the European
Well,
Court
why-
of Human
hang on,
Rights.
hang on. Why
And
do you
now
think
the
we
government
haven't-
has the perfect opportunity to do that. I think everybody can
Well,
get
why do
behind
you think
that.
we haven't seen any tangible benefits yet?
I didn't say we hadn't seen any
Right.
tangible benefits. I
Right.
said that we've got to see Brexit as an opportunity.
I want to get one other subject in here, Bonnie, and, you know, it's a touchy one. And I
Yeah,
don't want
because I told you I wasn't going to deal with this subject,
I
didn't
know, but I actually, in itself, that response I think is unacceptable.
It is acceptable.
I'll tell you, no, unacceptable. I'll tell you why. So the story behind this is that tonight in The Sun, they're going to reveal a story that Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, has apparently told NHS bosses that they have to rescind what they've been doing on the NHS website, which is removing all gender-specific language, particularly, in fact, exclusively, about women. And what they were doing was, on the guidance for women about health issues involving various cancers specific to women, ovarian cancer, cervical cancer and so on, they removed any mention of women. And they did this to appease the trans activist lobby.
To appease them.
Right. Now, I tell you why it's a miscalculation. I've written a column about this tonight for The Sun on the back of it. Because if you are a trans woman, so you're a biological male who transitions and becomes a trans woman, under the new rules, which came in last year, you can have new medical records established under your new self-identity. But that means you don't get automatically called for screening for the specific diseases pertaining to your biological sex. And that is actually going to put people's lives at risk.
Well,
and that's my problem with it.
this is the first...
Other than the fact that there's a war on calling women women.
This is the first time I've heard this. This is extremely complicated, and you've laid it out as it should be laid out. But I think that for the health secretary, who's a layman, just like you and me, to actually make a directive against doctors, that part is wrong. And I don't know
Why?
what...
He's the health secretary.
No, he's not. No, he's a politician.
He's elected.
He's
in charge of the health
official in charge of the health service.
No,
He's the boss.
Hang on. He's a politician. Doctors made the decision. I'm assuming.
Not in this country, no.
Well,
unfortunately,
women
the health service is not run by doctors, and that may be news to you.
We don't.
It's
no,
run
listen,
by politicians
Bonnie,
and
if I ask you-
I'm not talking. Wait, hang on. Wait a minute.
Oh, my.
I'm not talking about who runs it. If the health, I'm going to make the assumption. Isabel, can I speak?
Well,
Thank you.
I'm giving you the
can I
courtesy you
speak?
didn't give me.
All right. You speak. I'll sit here and listen to you.
Fine, all right.
Let me just put another point of the column I wrote, which is about... We did this on the show yesterday briefly, and I looked more into it. So the Burgess Hill Girls' School in West Sussex, the head teacher came out, the headmistress, and she said, we're not going to use the word girls anymore. And the school's name remains Burgess Hill Girls' School. She also said she was now reviewing whether to ever use the word daughter in correspondence to parents, lest it cause offence. And yet, if I looked at the website, which I did today for Burgess Hill Girls' School, the very first paragraph talks about we're going to turn your young girls into wonderful women. In other words, to get the money from the parents to enrol their kids at the school, the headmistress herself, in a letter, uses gender-specific language.
It will not surprise you that I think this whole thing is utterly absurd. But I think that you made actually a really good point, which I would imagine is going to be quite hard for people to argue against over this issue of whether they have what their health records say in terms of being called up for screening. But what about this whole thing of, men coming in for screening and ask whether they could be pregnant? I think that's going to be an insult to many.
Can I say something? I have a family member who is transitioning in a very difficult situation. I completely support her. I completely support her. And I think this conversation now I hear what you're saying, but it is extremely complicated. It's extremely complex.
Actually, it's not that complicated.
It is complex. Yes, it is.
No, it's not. Because
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
No,
yes,
let me explain why I don't
yes,
think it is.
Yes, it is. And I'm telling you this as a woman. This is complicated.
No, I think what's happened is that, unfortunately, in the promotion of trans rights, which I support, to fairness and equality, there are new inequalities and unfairnesses being created. And the main one for me, when you degender all this language around women and girls, when you say that you're not allowed to use the word girls in a girls' school, when the NHS removes the word women from specific guidance to women about women's diseases...
If you are particularly upset about degendering... If that's what you're saying, you know as a writer that all kinds of titles have been degendered in our lifetime.
But I don't agree with most of it.
Well, that's different. Well, that's different.
I think it's a war on the use of the word women.
But that's different, and I'm telling you, words have been degendered in my lifetime, and you know that. People, I don't use the actress. I don't use the word actress anymore.
Well, I can't even get on a plane with British Airways anymore and hear the familiar words, ladies and gentlemen, because somebody goes, I'm offended.
Well, don't
What
cry
about the rights of all the people who want to be called a lady or a gentleman?
Have a discussion about it. I never wanted to be called lady, and that was before this whole thing.
I want to be called a gentleman.
I never wanted to be called a lady.
I'm going to leave it there.